I think I just cracked the Spider-Man Brand New Day story from its trailer. I noticed something immediately the moment the trailer begins, and it's not just the loneliness, it's the acceptance in Peter's voice. He isn't fighting his reality anymore. After everything that happened, after the spell erased him from the lives of people he loved, he's standing in a world where he technically saved everyone, but emotionally lost everything. And the way this is framed doesn't feel like a fresh start. It feels like the aftermath of a sacrifice that keeps punishing him every single day. MJ is happy, Ned has moved on, and the world is safer. But Peter exists outside of all of it, like a ghost watching his own life continue without him. And that's where I started connecting the dots, because this isn't just a continuation. This feels like a psychological reset, a complete identity collapse that sets the stage for something far darker than we've seen before. Then comes that moment where he talks about the spell, and I think this is where the tone of the entire story becomes clear. He doesn't sound heroic, he sounds tired. There's a weight behind his words that tells me he's been living like this for a while, not days or weeks, but long enough for the isolation to settle in. And that matters, because Spider-Man has always been about responsibility, but here responsibility has stripped him of connection. It's not just that people don't remember him, it's that he can't even reintroduce himself without lying. Every interaction becomes artificial. Every smile he gives is built on a secret that could destroy everything again. And I started realizing this isn't just about loneliness. This is about identity erosion. Peter Parker is fading, and what remains is something more unstable, something that hasn't fully figured out what it is without the people who grounded him. And just when the trailer lets you sit in that emotional weight, it throws something completely unexpected at you. That line about Frank, that wasn't random. That wasn't just a throwaway joke. That was a signal. Because if Frank Castle is in this world now, then the rules are changing. The kind of violence we're about to see is not the usual superhero spectacle. This is street-level brutality. This is a world where criminals don't just get webbed up and handed to the police. They get punished permanently. And I think that's important because Peter is at his most vulnerable state right now. He's emotionally broken, isolated, and questioning himself. And suddenly, he's sharing the same city with someone who represents a completely different philosophy of justice. Someone who doesn't believe in second chances. And that contrast? That's going to push Peter into a space where he has to redefine what kind of hero he actually wants to be. When I really started breaking it down, the presence of a character like Frank isn't just about action, it's about influence. Imagine Peter, already struggling with control and identity, watching someone like that operate. Watching criminals disappear instead of getting arrested. Watching fear replace hope. That kind of environment changes you. And I think the film is setting up a scenario where Peter is constantly being tested, not just physically but morally. Every decision he makes is going to feel heavier because the line between right and wrong is becoming blurred around him. And this is where the darker tone really begins to take shape, because it's no longer about saving the day. It's about surviving it without losing yourself in the process. Then we get to the moment with Bruce Banner, and this is where things take a sharp turn into something even more unsettling. Peter goes to him for help, which makes sense. If something is happening to his body, Bruce is the logical choice. But the way Bruce responds, that's the part that stayed with me. He doesn't recognize Peter. He doesn't see Spider-Man. He sees a stranger asking for help. And I think this is one of the most painful moments in the trailer because it reinforces just how complete the memory wipe was. Even the people who once trusted him with world-ending threats now look at him like he's nobody. And that creates a barrier that isn't easy to overcome. Because how do you convince someone to help you when they have no reason to trust you? But what really caught my attention is what Peter is actually asking for help with. This isn't about a villain. This isn't about stopping someone else. This is about stopping himself. The mutation line changes everything. When I heard that dialogue about spiders having multiple life cycles and rebirth, I immediately realized this story is going deeper into the biology of Spider-Man than ever before. This isn't just powers anymore. This is transformation, and not the controlled, heroic kind. This feels unstable, dangerous. Like something is evolving inside him and he doesn't fully understand it. And that's terrifying because if Peter loses control of his own body, then he becomes the threat he's always tried to stop. The more I thought about it, the more it started to resemble the classic comic arcs where Peter's mutations spiral out of control. The idea of him growing extra limbs, losing his human form, becoming something closer to a creature than a hero that's not just visually intense, it's emotionally devastating, because Spider-Man has always been about balancing two identities. But what happens when one of those identities stops being human? What happens when the mask is no longer a choice, but a reflection of what he's becoming? That's where the horror element comes in. Not external horror, but internal. The fear of losing yourself from the inside out. And this is where everything begins to connect. The loneliness, the lack of support, the presence of harsher vigilantes, and now this uncontrollable mutation. It all points to a version of Peter who is being pushed to his absolute limit. He doesn't have a team. He doesn't have emotional support. And now he might not even have control over his own body. And that combination is dangerous. Because isolation doesn't just make you sad, it makes you desperate. And desperation leads to decisions that you wouldn't normally make. That's the kind of psychological pressure that can break even the strongest heroes. But then the trailer gives us something softer, something almost hopeful, and that's where MJ comes back into the picture. The setup is simple, but powerful. They're neighbors now. Two people living across from each other, connected by proximity but separated by memory. And I think this is one of the most emotionally complex parts of the story. Because Peter is essentially getting a second chance, but it's not the same relationship. He can't just pick up where they left off. He has to rebuild everything from scratch. And that means pretending to be someone new while hiding who he really is. That's a different kind of struggle. One where every moment is filled with tension, because one wrong move could bring everything crashing down again. What makes this even more intense is the timing. Peter is going through a mutation. He's becoming unstable. And at the same time, he's trying to reconnect with someone he loves without exposing her to the danger he represents. That's not just difficult, that's almost impossible. And I think that's where the emotional core of the film lies. It's not just about whether Peter can save himself physically, it's about whether he can protect the people he cares about while he's falling apart internally. And that dual conflict creates a constant push and pull that drives the entire narrative forward. As I kept analyzing the trailer, one idea became clearer than anything else. This isn't just a story about survival, it's a story about rebirth, but not in the clean, heroic way we usually see. This is messy, painful, uncertain. Peter isn't rising from the ashes as the same person. He's being forced to redefine himself in a world that doesn't remember him and a body that might betray him, and that's what makes this version of Spider-Man so compelling. He's not just fighting villains, he's fighting the very concept of who he is supposed to be. And when you bring all these elements together, the bigger picture starts to form. The mutation isn't just a plot device, it's a metaphor. It represents the internal chaos that Peter is experiencing. The loss of identity, the struggle to hold on to his humanity, the fear of becoming something unrecognizable. It's all tied into this transformation. And the presence of characters like Frank only amplifies that conflict, showing him what he could become if he lets go of his moral compass, while MJ represents the opposite. A chance to hold on to something real, something human, even when everything else is falling apart. By the time I reached the end of the trailer, I wasn't just seeing a setup for another superhero movie. I was seeing the beginning of a character breakdown. A story where Peter Parker has to rebuild himself from nothing while battling something that's trying to tear him apart from the inside. And that's what makes this feel so different, so much darker. Because the real question isn't whether he can win, it's whether he can remain himself by the time it's over. And honestly, that's what makes me the most excited. Because if this theory holds true, we're about to see a version of Spider-Man we've never seen before. One that is raw, unstable, and constantly on the edge. A hero who isn't just saving others, but desperately trying to save himself. And if he fails, the consequences won't just be physical. They'll be deeply personal. Permanent. So now the real mystery begins. Not who the villain is. Not how the story ends. But what Peter Parker becomes when everything that defined him is stripped away. And if you enjoyed breaking this down with me, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.